Hello, everyone. My name is Ayush, and I'll be your host for today's podcast. I am joined here today by two of my good friends. If y'all could introduce yourselves.
Hey, my name's Richard.
And I'm Miles.
Yeah, so the discussion for today's podcast is going to be Robin Hood. In particular, all of us watched some adaptation films or episodes of traditional Robin Hood stories from the 1400s and 1300s. And yeah, what's interesting is that all of us, the films that we watched, were more cartoons or animations, and so they were tailored towards younger audiences, which we thought would be, an interesting topic of discussion. So, Richard, if you could start off by, introducing your Backyardigans episode.
Right, so my episode was from the Backyardigans, and it centers around a fictional story that the characters create called Filthingham, which has the character Austin as the mayor of it. So in this fictional town, Austin prohibits the villagers from practicing any sort of personal hygiene. Like, they're not allowed to brush their teeth, not allowed to take showers, not allowed to wear deodorant, and he confiscates all of their items from them so that they can't. And the villagers are pretty unhappy with this throughout. So they go to the character Pablo in this episode, whose name is, or who plays Robin Hood, and in order for him to give them their equipment back and free the city from his rule. Then a subplot of that is that the mayor has these events going on in the city, what he calls the Festival of Dirt, which are basically carnival games played for fun, I guess. And a noteworthy thing to me about this is that the Austin cheats throughout these games, and he then I think it's interesting to see the metaphor of both cleanliness spiritually and physically be represented in this show through this small episode.
Yeah, that's cool. Miles, could you introduce your anime?
Yeah, so my anime is a 1990 show from Japan. It's also just called Robin Hood. And it's like a traditional Japanese anime, and it shows mostly traditional Robin Hood elements and themes in the stories, but it focuses a little bit more on Robin Hood growing up, since in my show, the anime, Robin Hood is more so like a teenager, and so we get to experience his coming of age aspect of his life on top of the traditional Robin Hood elements, such as the forest or the sheriff, that kind of thing.
Right. Cool. And yeah, I watched a Tom and Jerry movie on Robin Hood. And so what's interesting about this is I went into this movie expecting I expected Jerry to be Robin Hood himself, but he's more of a companion to the actual Robin Hood, and this is the first Tom and Jerry story I've seen with humans that have actual faces, because typically you'll have disembodied voices, and it's just the lower half of people in your typical Tom and Jerry episode. So this was really interesting, and of course Jerry acts as the main antagonist for Tom acts as the main antagonist for Jerry throughout most of the movie. And he's working under the main villain of the story, which is the Sheriff of Nottingham, and then Prince John, of course. And I found this adaptation really fun, really fast-paced, very typical of a Tom and Jerry episode. They had a lot of fighting, a lot of antics. Tom was constantly getting into really dumb situations. And, what I liked about this movie is eventually Tom and Jerry end up working together, which is very similar to the, typical Tom and Jerry story, where they're more friends rather than enemies. So I like the ending a lot. And of course, it was, your stereotypical happy ending. Robin Hood saves the day, he gets everything he wants, and, the villains are locked up or whatever. But yeah, I wanted to shift the discussion more to the similarities that these stories had with traditional Robin Hood stories from the 14th and 15th centuries. So for my Tom and Jerry movie, I noticed a lot of similarities. For example, we had Robin Hood as the protagonist. He's a very heroic figure. We had Maid Marian as his main love interest in the royal situation, and then we had the sheriff and Prince John acting as the main villains. So yeah, plot-wise, we had a lot of similarities as well. We had the sheriff constantly getting outwitted by Robin Hood and his merry men. Robin Hood steals the taxes that the sheriff has collected and distributes them back to the poor, and is generally helping them out. So, taking from the rich and giving to the poor. Yeah, that's it. Richard, do you want to talk about yours?
Yeah. So I think out of the three interpretations, the Backyardigans took the most liberty in the plot and structure of a Robin Hood story, since it isn't an adaptation of anything from the original writings, and a lot of the characters in most Robin Hood stories are absent. For example, there's no mention of a Maid Marian. There's no mention of a Prince John. There's no mention of a Little John. There's no mention of any character by name except Robin Hood and the king himself. And to add to that, the story itself, like I said, revolves around a completely different premise of just Robin Hood liberating the whole village rather than any particular person or incident. So I think overall it's a much more simplified narrative, which is to be expected since the Backyardigans has a pretty small or a pretty young target audience.
So for mine, the story was actually very similar to normal Robin Hood, and each individual episode was almost like its own little saga, typical Robin Hood story, but put them all together, you get this larger plot for the whole story. And all the characters were the same name, and the show was obviously in an animated style, but you can tell which character is which because they didn't really stray too far away from the traditional Robin Hood look or the sheriff look or anything like that. And Maid Marian and all these other characters were very similar, but specifically Maid Marian, she plays a larger role as a love interest for Robin Hood in my show, the anime, because it is more of a coming-of-age story for Robin Hood, and having a love interest kind of adds this whole other plot to it that I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, I'm noticing a common theme between all of our adaptations, where they kind of have a more, whimsical, lighthearted undertone to them because they are targeted towards children and, younger teens. I noticed it was kind of interesting. The animation style for mine was different from typical Tom and Jerry movies, as in typical Tom and Jerry episodes are very picturesque. They kind of seem like watercolored, honestly. And this was a lot more darker lines, a lot more of your stereotypical cartoon, which made me wonder, these adaptations are probably altered or designed in some way to be more Robin Hood specific. So I wanted to ask you guys, I'll start off with you, Miles. How do you think the values of your anime compared to more traditional Robin Hood values as an adaptation?
I think I'd have to say they're pretty much lined up with normal Robin Hood. A lot of value with loyalty and justice, because again, each episode is its own little Robin Hood story, which follows a traditional storyline, obviously. But it is much more simplified because at the end of the day, my show the anime is for the younger audience. So although it follows a lot of those same values as typical Robin Hood, it kind of points them out much more, makes it more obvious for the audience.
So for my adaptation, I think that the values it emphasizes are not dissimilar from Robin Hood. for the Backyardigans is there's quite a few I think that are missing that you would find in a normal Robin Hood adaptation, but the ones that are present are definitely loyalty and friendship, as Pablo, or Robin Hood, in this adaptation is a friend and an ex-villager of Filthingham, so him returning to help his friends definitely demonstrates that. And then I think an interesting inclusion, and probably the most obvious here, is I guess, good character and personal hygiene, since they're not explicitly mentioned, but our hygiene is explicitly mentioned as the narrative of the whole story, whereas you have good character and morality, I guess, as an undertone, since it only appears through that metaphor of dirtiness being both a physical property and a characteristic of the king, whereas it's not present in Robin Hood.
Yeah. For my Tom and Jerry episode, I'd say it's pretty similar to yours, Richard, in terms of the values it promotes. It's mainly friendship, loyalty, that kind of thing. I noticed that Robin Hood and his merry men had a much more equal standing. Usually the merry men are sort of underneath Robin Hood, but in this movie they tended to tease Robin Hood about his interest in Maid Marian and his desire to be the best archer in all of England, which I thought was really fun. But yeah, other than that, it was pretty much typical Robin Hood values. So yeah, let's do this quickly. What would y'all, for the listeners, what would y'all rate your adaptation out of 10, both as a Robin Hood adaptation and as its own, lone standing film?
So for me, I think the Backyardigans episode overall is pretty enjoyable to watch. There's a lot of musical parts of it, which I think are incredibly entertaining to listen to. And, I don't know, rewatching it, since I believe I watched it when I was younger, was just overall a really nice experience. So I think I'd probably give it like an 8. And as a Robin Hood adaptation, I think there's enough missing about it to where you can argue it's not necessary to have it be a Robin Hood adaptation, but it still has that principle, and I think it adds maybe something for them to have a Robin Hood thematic adaptation. So I think there I'd give it around a 6.
Yeah. What about you, Mouse?
For mine, I really enjoyed watching it. I thought it was really funny, and I got to watch it in Japanese, which probably makes my rankings a little higher because the dub is terrible. So I'll give it like a 7. And in terms of like being similar to Robin Hood, it is actually very, very similar to just traditional Robin Hood. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just called Robin Hood. So I'd probably give it like an 8 or a 9 based on how well it sticks to traditional Robin Hood like themes and plot and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's no secret I'm a huge fan of Tom and Jerry. I mean, just this past summer, I rewatched like all of the 1950s episode. So as a lone standing, entity, I'd have to rate this like a 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed watching this. As a Robin Hood adaptation, there were a lot of information that was kind of important to the traditional stories that was left out. Because it's targeted towards children, you can't have a lot of the violence and the darker themes. So I'd rate it like a 7.5 as an adaptation. But yeah, anyways, before we end the podcast, do y'all have any, questions you wanted to ask each other? Or me?
So, you mentioned that your adaptation is centered around Robin Hood coming of age. Do you think there's anything particular about it, that coming of age aspect, that isn't present in a normal Robin Hood story?
I mean, I guess a little bit. It's mostly him learning how to do certain things, like maturing in general, but I feel like his love interest part was very interesting to see from a coming of age perspective, because he is just like, at his age, he's just now like having like a love interest, which he doesn't really like understand how to deal with as much. So I thought that was very interesting to watch, because he's not quite mature enough to truly understand how to deal with that kind of thing. But yeah.
Richard, I wanted to ask you quickly, do you think the themes of dirtiness and lack of cleanliness serves as a good representation of, what the sheriff represents, corruption in general.
I think corruption is a pretty strong word to use, since this is at the end of the day a kid's interpretation of Robin Hood. So, I guess definitely more. I think it's a face value. It's of poor character, of kids, cheating, getting their way, whatever. But I don't think there's enough of a political edge to the interpretation for it to be called corruption.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Anyways, we are coming to the end of our time, so I'd like to thank Richard and Miles for joining me today, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in. But yeah, that's it.